In October of 2004, just a few weeks before the presidential contest was about to take place in the US between the incumbent president, George W. Bush, and his challenger, then Senator John Kerry, Oliver Burkeman, who is a columnist for a British newspaper, The Guardian, well, he wrote a piece that garnered him quite a bit of notoriety, particularly in the US. This piece was entitled, "My Fellow NonAmericans." Now, what Burkeman thought was that the upcoming presidential race, the 2004 election, or the results of that election, would have implications not just for the United States, but for Europe and for the world. He thought, therefore, that it was a bit unfair that only Americans got a voice in selecting who the next president would be. And in feeling like this, he wasn't alone. The late Christopher Hitchens once said that the secret dream of all Europeans is to one day participate in an American presidential election. So Burkeman came up with a plan that he wrote about in this column. And what he was going to do, or what he wanted to do, was pair up British readers of The Guardian with American voters. And the idea was there would be sort of a pen pal thing going on, where the British readers would write letters to the Americans saying, you need to think about the implications of the results of this election before you go vote. Well, he had a problem. And the problem was, he knew about 120 million people were going to participate in the 2004 presidential race. And he didn't have that many readers. So he had to figure out a way where he could concentrate the energy of these letter writers, who they could write to, a small group that might make a large difference in the American presidential election. And where did he choose? A small county in southwestern Ohio, Clark County. And in fact, this became known as Operation Clark County, where the British readers would write letters. And it wasn't looked on very fondly by Americans in general or by the people of Clark County. And in fact, there were charges that this was an attempt to illegally influence a US election by a foreign party. The head, or a member of the Board of Elections for Clark County, made a statement saying, the American Revolution was fought for a reason. And perhaps because of this backlash, Burkeman's campaign failed miserably, at least from his perspective. He clearly wanted Senator John Kerry to win Ohio, to win Clark County, and to win the election. And Clark County in 2000 had voted for the Democratic candidate, Al Gore, by a narrow margin. But in 2004, maybe because of this letter-writing campaign, Clark County went narrowly for George W. Bush, as did Ohio, as did the country. Where do you think Oliver Burkeman got this idea that Ohio was so important? By one count done by the Washington Post, either President Obama or his Vice President, Joe Biden, visited the Buckeye State once every 3 weeks during his first term in office. The press also seems to think that Ohio is very important in presidential elections. And every 4 years, they repeat the political mantra that no one has been elected president since 1960 unless they have won the state of Ohio. Now, that particular political mantra has the virtue of actually being true. No one has been elected president since 1960 without winning Ohio. And that means that a vast majority of voters in the US have never participated in a presidential election where Ohio didn't vote for the winner. The problem is, however, when you start drilling down into that a little bit and taking a look at it, it is true that in 2000, George W. Bush had to win Ohio to win the election. But the electoral vote was so narrow in 2000 that if he lost any state, he would have lost the election. He also needed Ohio in 2004. But Barack Obama could have become president in 2008 and reelected in 2012, even if he had lost Ohio. These are the election results with him losing Ohio. He still would have had a majority in the Electoral College. So it raises the question, is Ohio really this crucial swing state that we think it is? Is this true? And if it is true, why? It is definitely true that Ohio is a swing state, maybe not a crucial swing state, but a swing state, if we define a swing state as a state that swings back and forth in presidential elections. That is very narrow in the margins of victory. If you take a look at all the votes for the Democratic candidate for president cast in Ohio between 2000 and 2012, and all the votes cast for the Republican candidate for president, it's about 21 million votes cast, and the difference is only about 150,000 votes. That's less than 1% over all those votes being cast. So it is incredibly tight. If you look at other so-called swing states, for example, Florida, during that same period, even though Florida had that incredibly tight election in 2000, 500 and some votes, overall, over 4 elections, the margin is twice as large as a percentage in Florida as it is in Ohio. So indeed, we are a swing state. But are we an important swing state? To figure this out, we got to talk for a minute about American presidential elections. You all know about the blue states, the red states, and maybe the purple states. Right? Blue states are states that always vote for the Democratic candidate for president in presidential elections. We know that before we even know who the candidate is. And red states are states that always vote for the Republican, again, regardless of who the candidate is. And then we have those purple states. And they're a little bit red and a little bit blue. Right? We're not sure what they are. These are those swing states. And there's only about a dozen of them. And the truth is that American presidential elections only take place, really, in these 12 states. Right? Because ahead of the election, we already know how the other states are going to vote. But all of these purple states are not created equal. And to understand this, you need to think back to your high school civics class a little bit, when you learned, hopefully, about the Electoral College and the fact that we don't really vote directly for president in the United States. That instead, when we vote in November, we are selecting a slate of electors who go to their state capitals in December and actually vote for president. And you determine how many electors a state has by adding together the number of House members a state has with their senators. Every state has 2 senators. It's in the Constitution. That will always be the case. But it's the House members that vary, because every 10 years we count the number of people in states. And if your state didn't grow as much as another state, you lose House members, House seats. And when you lose House seats, you lose electoral votes. Ohio, when you look at the number of electoral votes, actually has a pretty significant chunk. Right? We have 18 electoral votes. And when you look at the purple states, that places us third in terms of electoral power. I sometimes have a little trouble labeling Pennsylvania as a swing state. They haven't voted for a Republican candidate for president since 1988. But we still consider them a swing state. But if you took them out of the mix, we're second. So we have a lot of votes for president among those states where the votes vary a little bit, where you're not sure who they're going to vote for. I told you a little bit about how the number of House members you have varies from time to time based on the counting of the population, the every 10-year census that we hold. Ohio has been losing House members. And that means we are losing electoral votes. When George W. Bush won Ohio in 2000, he gained 21 votes for president out of the 270 that you need. When George W. Bush was reelected in 2004, he won Ohio and only got 20 votes. And when Barack Obama won Ohio, this last time, he only got 18 electoral votes. So we've seen the number diminishing, yet the attention on Ohio has, if anything, increased. They did a survey and found that more campaign commercials were purchased in Ohio in 2012 than in any other state. So it leads to the question, why is this the case? And I don't think it's only because Ohio is a swing state in the sense that we are closely divided, or that we have a lot of electoral votes because that's going down. Those things are important. But the fact of the matter is, I think Ohio is an important swing state and crucial in presidential elections because Ohio looks like the United States. We are a microcosm of the country. Here you can look at wealth. You can also look at age, race and ethnicity. And you see that Ohio looks remarkably like the United States, with one exception. Right? When you look at race and ethnicity, you see that the Hispanic population in Ohio is lower than the Hispanic population nationwide. But even in that, Ohio's trying to catch up. You look at the increase in the number of Hispanics who live in Ohio from 1980 until 2010. And you see this exponential increase, mostly in the cities in Ohio. So even in that, we're changing to look more like the United States. And because we look like the United States, we've become the ideal test market. When businesses want to test a product, oftentimes they come to Ohio first. And the idea is, if you can sell it in Ohio, you can sell it to the rest of the country. And I think it's the same way in presidential politics. If you can sell a presidential candidate in the state of Ohio, you can probably sell them to the rest of the country. On the other hand, if you can't sell a candidate in Ohio, you're going to have difficulty selling that candidate to the rest of the country. And that's why Ohio is the ultimate swing state. Thank you.